Tonight's story begins on a cold, snowy road, where two children sit quietly in the back of a car, their small hands clasped together. Their mother is gone. Their future is uncertain, and they are being taken to a place they have never seen before. Their grandfather's old wooden farm. Imagine this: a lonely farmhouse covered in fresh snow, a warm light glowing from the window, and two children stepping out of the car, scared, cold, but holding on to each other. They don't know it yet, but a miracle is waiting for them behind that door. This is a story of love that survived beyond goodbye, of a grandfather's final gift, and of how God can turn even the hardest endings into new beginnings. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? If you enjoy stories filled with hope and quiet miracles, please subscribe, leave a comment, and help this story reach someone who needs comfort today. Late autumn settled heavily over the small town of Riverton, Wyoming, where the wind carried a sharp cold that made every step feel slower and every breath sting the lungs. The sky was a muted gray canvas, stretched tightly above rows of modest houses, their chimneys fuming softly as if trying to fight off the coming winter. Streetlights flickered over nearly empty sidewalks, where only a few cars hummed by, their headlights cutting through the misty chill of the evening. The town was peaceful, but beneath that quiet lay the harsh reality of working-class families struggling through each day, and among them was a young single mother named Anna Cooper. Anna, 32 years old, had the kind of appearance that revealed the exhaustion she carried long before she spoke. She was of average height, with slightly slouched shoulders, slim from years of skipped meals, and her long chestnut brown hair was usually tied back loosely because she never had time to style it. Her skin was pale from constant indoor labor, and faint shadows lived beneath her gentle hazel eyes. Yet something warm remained in her expression, a softness that only mothers who put everything into their children possessed. She was known around town as quiet, hard-working, and unfailingly kind, though very few people knew the weight she bore. Every day, Anna juggled 3 jobs: waiting tables at a diner during the mornings, cleaning offices during late afternoons, and stocking shelves in the small grocery store on the edge of town during the night shift. She worked without complaint because she had 2 reasons to keep going: her son Ethan and her daughter Lily. Ethan, 10 years old, had a thin frame and messy dark brown hair that often covered part of his forehead. His hazel eyes mirrored his mother's, filled with the same quiet resilience. He was protective, always holding his sister's hand wherever they went. Lily, 7 years old, was smaller, with sandy blonde hair that tangled easily and soft blue eyes that still shimmered with childhood innocence, despite the tough life she experienced. Her green shirt was slightly faded and her jeans worn out, but she carried herself with a natural sweetness that made people smile. On the night everything changed, Anna was working her overnight shift at the grocery store. The building heaters struggled against the Wyoming cold, making the aisles feel both chilly and artificial. She moved robotically, lifting boxes, stocking shelves, bending, carrying, repeating, her body long past its limit. Her manager, Mr. Carter, a gruff man in his late 50s with a thick gray mustache and a slightly hunched posture, noticed her pale face and trembling hands. He was a man who rarely spoke more than necessary, shaped by years of managing workers and dealing with long hours. Though stern, he wasn't unkind. "Anna, you okay? You look like you're about to fall over," he muttered without looking up from his clipboard. His voice carried a roughness that suggested he was more worried than his tone let on. "I'm fine," Anna whispered, though her breathing was shallow. She steadied herself against a shelf, trying to focus. The room seemed to tilt slightly, but she pushed through. She always pushed through. But that night, her body finally gave out. As she lifted another box, her vision blurred completely. A sudden pressure slammed into her chest, as if someone had gripped her heart with icy hands. The fluorescent lights above her swayed in her sight, like they were underwater. Her knees buckled. The last thing she heard before darkness took her was Mr. Carter shouting her name. An ambulance wove through the cold Wyoming streets, its siren echoing across quiet neighborhoods. The paramedic attending to her, a middle-aged woman named Sarah Miller, checked her vitals with practiced urgency. Sarah had a tall, lean build, with silver-streaked black hair tied in a tight bun, and calm brown eyes that spoke of years spent seeing people on their worst days. She was known for her steady hands and steady heart, always speaking with a gentle firmness. "Stay with me, Anna. You're going to be okay. Just breathe," she said, though she recognized the signs of deep exhaustion written all over the young mother's body. At the hospital, glaring white lights and the smell of disinfectant filled the air. Doctors rushed her into examination, while Ethan and Lily sat in the waiting area, frightened and confused. They had been picked up by a kind neighbor who saw the ambulance arrive and brought them to the hospital. When Anna finally woke up, she was lying in a narrow bed, surrounded by the soft beeping of machines. A doctor entered, Dr. Harris, a man in his early 40s with short, sandy hair, clean-shaven face, and a calm but serious demeanor. His eyes carried the quiet heaviness of someone who had delivered far too much bad news in his career. "Anna," he said gently, pulling a chair beside her bed. "You collapsed due to severe heart failure caused by years of overwork, stress, and malnutrition. I'm afraid—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You likely have about a month left." Anna stared at him, unable to speak. Her throat tightened, and the world around her seemed to vanish into a crushing silence. A month. Only a month. She turned her head slowly and saw Ethan and Lily curled up together on the small sofa in the corner, both fast asleep, their little bodies pressed close for warmth and comfort. Tears filled her eyes instantly. Everything she had endured, everything she had sacrificed, everything she had hoped for, it all narrowed into this moment of devastating truth. She would not be there to see them grow up. She would not be there on their birthdays, their first heartbreaks, their graduations. She felt her chest tighten, not from illness this time, but from grief. In the stillness of that hospital room, Anna made a decision she had avoided for over a decade. There was one person left who could help Ethan and Lily build a future. One person she had pushed away after a painful argument from her youth, her father, George Cooper. Her hands trembled as she reached for her old phone. She hadn't spoken to him in years, but tonight, for the sake of her children, she knew she had to try. With a trembling breath, she typed the message. The message Anna sent left the small Wyoming town of Riverton and traveled across the cold night until it reached a quiet, rural stretch of land over 200 miles away. There, nestled between rolling fields turning brown for winter and distant mountains dusted with early snow, stood the Cooper family farm, once lively, now subdued by age and silence. Inside the old farmhouse, a warm yellow lamp glowed in the living room where George Cooper sat alone in a worn armchair. George, now 68, had the appearance of a man shaped by both work and regret. He was tall but slightly stooped, with broad shoulders that had once carried heavy tools with ease but now carried only the weight of memories. His hair, once dark, had turned to thin wisps of gray, and a neat beard framed his weathered face, giving him a rugged dignity. Deep lines creased his forehead and the corners of his eyes, lines carved by years of harsh sun, long days on the land, and nights spent wondering where his daughter had gone. His blue-gray eyes, once sharp, were softer now, tinged with sadness but still holding warmth. Despite the distance that life had forced between them, George had never hardened his heart toward Anna. He had only blamed himself for letting her walk out the door without stopping her all those years ago. When his phone vibrated on the small wooden table beside him, he expected it to be another reminder from the clinic, or perhaps a message from a neighbor checking on him. But when he reached out with a trembling hand and saw the name Anna glowing on the screen, his breath caught in his chest. He stared, stunned, his fingers shaking as though afraid that touching the message might make it disappear. Slowly, he opened it, and as the words appeared, tears blurred his vision. To anyone else, the message might have seemed simple, but to him, it was a miracle. A bridge finally rebuilt after a decade of silence. A choked sound escaped him, something between a sob and a laugh. He pressed the back of his hand against his eyes, overwhelmed. For years he had hired private investigators, none particularly high profile, just small-town specialists, to look for her, always hoping for even the smallest sign. He had never stopped searching, never stopped worrying, never stopped loving her. And now she had reached out, but the joy of the moment clashed painfully with the reality he faced. The ticking clock on the wall was the only sound filling the room until another noise broke the quiet. George's cough, deep and raw. Weeks earlier, he had sat in a cold examination room while an oncologist explained the truth. Late-stage cancer, aggressive, unstoppable. The doctor, Dr. Newman, a calm man in his 50s with graying hair and rectangular glasses that gave him a scholarly appearance, had delivered the news with gentle professionalism. Dr. Newman's steady voice came from decades of managing tragedies with compassion rather than coldness. He explained that without treatment, George had only a few weeks left, and even with treatment, not much more. George had listened silently, gripping the arms of the chair until his knuckles turned white. He didn't fear death. His life had been long, fulfilled in some ways, but he feared leaving unfinished business, feared never making things right with Anna. Now, reading her message, that fear burned even stronger. He wanted desperately to get into his truck and drive to her, to apologize, to hold her, to tell her she was never alone, but he knew he would not make it there. Even standing too long made his chest tighten. He had no strength left to travel. Reality pressed down on him like the early winter frost creeping across his windows. Time, his oldest companion on the farm, had turned against him. Yet he could not let his daughter's children grow up without support, without belonging, without the family name that still meant something on this land. He wiped his face and reached for his phone again, but this time he scrolled through his contacts and selected the number of the one person he trusted, Mr. Bradley, his longtime lawyer. Bradley arrived the next morning. He was 55, tall with a lean build, and always dressed with quiet formality in dark suits that contrasted with the rustic wooden farmhouse. His short graying hair and neatly trimmed beard gave him a distinguished appearance, while his sharp brown eyes reflected intelligence and unwavering patience. Over the years, he had seen George through property disputes, tax paperwork, and even the emotional burden of searching for Anna. Bradley was a man who spoke little but listened well, shaped by a past as a public defender where he had witnessed countless families torn apart by hardship. Those years had made him empathetic, yet firm. Bradley sat across from George at the kitchen table, where sunlight filtered in through lace curtains. George explained everything: Anna's message, her 2 children, her collapsing health, and his own diagnosis. Bradley listened closely, nodding slowly, his expression turning grave but compassionate. "George," he said softly, "we need to act quickly. If what the doctor says is true, time is not on your side." "I know," George replied, his voice roughened by emotion. "I need you to help me secure everything for those children. The land, the livestock, the savings, everything. They deserve stability. They deserve to know they have a home." Bradley opened his briefcase, pulled out documents, and began drafting the necessary legal papers. He asked questions about inheritance, guardianship, and instructions for the children's future. George answered each one with determination in his eyes. He described the land that had been passed down through generations and insisted it stay in the family. He also explained the small trust fund he had saved over the years and how it should be allocated for the education and well-being of Ethan and Lily. Though he had never seen them, he felt love blooming for them as naturally as dawn rising over the fields. The meeting ended with Bradley promising to finalize everything within the next 24 hours. George watched the lawyer's car disappear down the gravel road, then returned to his armchair. He stared at Anna's message again, his thumb brushing over the screen as if it were her cheek. He whispered, voice breaking, "I'm still here, sweetheart. I'm still with you." He typed a simple reply, one filled with warmth, apology, and hope, before leaning back and closing his eyes, exhausted but relieved for the first time in years. The morning sun filtered gently through the hospital windows, casting a pale golden glow across the quiet room where Anna lay resting. The soft beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence, steady yet fragile, much like her remaining time. Ethan and Lily sat close together on the small sofa, their clothes slightly wrinkled from another night spent in the hospital. Their faces showed innocence mixed with confusion, unable to grasp the full weight of what was happening around them. Anna watched them with a mixture of love and heartbreak, her hands trembling faintly against the thin blanket. A knock sounded at the door, calm and deliberate. When it opened, Mr. Bradley stepped inside with a solemn expression. Dressed in his usual dark gray suit, he looked out of place in the sterile hospital room, yet his presence brought a sense of reassurance. His tall, lean frame carried an air of quiet authority, and his composed brown eyes softened when he saw Anna. "Good morning, Anna," he greeted gently, closing the door behind him. His short graying hair was neatly brushed back, and his trimmed beard made him look both dignified and dependable. Years of working with families in crisis had shaped him into a man who approached pain with respect, never with judgment. Anna struggled to sit up a little straighter. Her chestnut hair, now tangled from days of discomfort, fell loosely over her shoulders. Her hazel eyes, usually warm, were clouded with worry and exhaustion. "Mr. Bradley, thank you for coming," she whispered. Her voice was thin but steady. She sensed there was something significant in the folder he held. Bradley pulled a chair close to her bedside and sat down. He opened the folder carefully, revealing a stack of neatly organized documents. "Anna," he began softly, "your father wanted me to bring these to you immediately. He asked me to ensure you understood how deeply he cares for you and for your children." His tone held a tenderness that surprised her. Bradley was formal by nature, but today compassion seeped through every word. When he handed her the first letter, Anna hesitated before taking it. The paper trembled in her grasp. It was her father's handwriting. She recognized the slightly slanted script instantly. As she read, tears began to spill, tracing silent paths down her cheeks. The letter wasn't long, but every line was filled with regret, love, and longing. George had written about the years he spent searching for her, about the guilt he carried, about how proud he still was of the woman she had become. And finally, he wrote about his short time left, apologizing for not being able to hold her hand through this moment. Ethan and Lily watched quietly. Ethan's hazel eyes widened with concern, and Lily, with her soft blue eyes, inched closer to her mother, gently touching her arm. They didn't know what the letter said, but they understood enough to know that something important was happening. Bradley waited respectfully before continuing. "Your father prepared a detailed plan for the children's future," he said, laying out several documents. He wanted them to have every chance possible, to learn, to grow, and one day to stand strong on their own. He spoke with a quiet steadiness, his voice the anchor in the storm that threatened to overwhelm Anna. He first opened the section dedicated to Ethan. "For your son," Bradley explained, "your father emphasized building strong foundational skills." He pointed to the listed steps. Ethan, thin and a bit timid but observant, leaned forward slightly, curious. Bradley described how Ethan would be guided through reading and writing improvement, basic arithmetic, and critical thinking exercises. Then he moved on to manual skills, learning to repair hinges, fix broken tools, and understand simple mechanics. "Your father believed that practical knowledge builds confidence," Bradley added gently. There were also lessons planned in gardening, animal care, and eventually farm management, balancing records, tracking supplies, understanding the rhythms of the land. Every detail reflected the grandfather's desire to prepare Ethan for independence and leadership. Then Bradley turned to Lily's section. "For your daughter," he said with a faint smile. "Your father wanted her to choose her own path." Lily blinked in surprise, her messy blonde hair falling over her face as she tilted her head. Bradley explained that Lily would receive the same essential education, reading, writing, math, but afterward she would be given freedom to explore her interests. Whether it was singing, dancing, painting, or music, the plan allowed room for her creativity to bloom. "And when she's older," Bradley continued, "she can choose to work alongside Ethan on the farm or follow any career she dreams of." Anna covered her mouth with one trembling hand. The thought of her children having choices, real choices, not forced survival, struck her deeply. George had prepared not just a will, but a structured future filled with opportunity and intention. Her father, who she believed had turned his back on her, had in truth spent his remaining strength planning for her children's lives. "Your father wanted them to know they are loved," Bradley said softly. "He wanted them to know they belong somewhere." Anna nodded slowly, tears falling once more. She looked at Ethan and Lily, both watching her with wide, silent eyes, and whispered, "Your grandfather, he cared so much for you." The room felt still for several moments. Bradley gathered the documents neatly and placed them on the bedside table. His voice became gentle but firm. "Anna, I will make sure everything is handled. Your children will be protected. You have my word." Anna reached out and held his hand briefly, gratitude shining through the sorrow. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. As Bradley stood to leave, the weight of the documents remained behind. Pages that represented hope, guidance, and a legacy of love meant for two children who needed it most. The days that followed drifted by like fading candlelight, each moment softer and more fragile than the one before. The hospital room grew quieter, the beeping monitors slower, and Anna's breaths more delicate. Outside, early winter settled over Riverton, bringing thin blankets of frost across car windows and layering the sidewalks with shimmering white dust. The cold air pressed against the building, but inside, warmth came from two small children clinging to the final days they had left with their mother. Anna's strength weakened steadily, her once lively hazel eyes now dulled by exhaustion, yet still filled with love each time they landed on Ethan and Lily. She used every bit of remaining energy to teach them the smallest but most meaningful lessons. Lessons she knew would carry her voice into their futures. She guided Ethan's hands as he practiced tying his shoes, her fingers trembling as she showed him the motions. "You'll get better with practice," she whispered, her voice thin. Ethan, though only 10, nodded with a seriousness beyond his years, determined to memorize everything. Lily, with her sandy blonde hair tangled from restless nights, stood beside the bed each morning, learning how to brush her teeth properly while listening to her mother's soft instructions. Lily's blue eyes often filled with tears halfway through, but Anna always cupped her cheek gently, wiping them away with her thumb. "It's okay to cry," she would murmur, "but you must also be brave." Lily nodded each time, trying to be strong, even when her small body trembled. Every day, Anna reminded them of kindness, how to care for each other, to hold hands when scared, to speak softly when the world felt heavy. She told them stories of sunsets over warm fields, of laughter she once shared with their grandfather before anger created a long silence. She shared memories she had never spoken aloud, hoping her children would feel their roots even if she couldn't show them herself. Mr. Bradley visited often during those final days. His presence, always calm and composed, steadied the room. He would enter with slow footsteps, his dark suit slightly wrinkled from long hours spent managing documents and phone calls. Though his expression was typically reserved, the faint softness in his brown eyes revealed a quiet sadness for the small family before him. The weight of handling legal matters for a dying mother and her two young children was heavy, even for a man shaped by years of witnessing difficult transitions. He always spoke gently around them, careful not to disturb the fragile peace. On one particular afternoon, as golden light filtered through the window, Anna felt her strength slipping faster. She asked Ethan and Lily to climb into the bed beside her. Ethan settled on her right, his thin frame pressed close, while Lily curled against her left side, her small fingers clinging to the blanket. Anna wrapped her arms around them both, gathering what little energy she had left to speak clearly. Her voice shook at first, but steadied as she focused on their faces, Ethan's determined gaze and Lily's trembling lips. "Listen to me, my loves," she whispered, her breath warm against their hair. "If one day you can't find me anymore, you must remember something very important." Ethan's grip tightened on her hand. Lily's eyes widened in fear. Anna continued, "You will still have a home, a place meant for you. Your grandfather, he has prepared everything. He loved you even before he knew your names." The words fell heavily into the room. Ethan's hazel eyes filled instantly, and Lily burst into tears, burying her face into her mother's chest. Anna stroked their hair gently, fighting her own rising sobs. She held them close, as if she could pour every last ounce of her love into their small hearts. The emotional weight eventually cracked both children. Ethan tried to stay strong, swallowing hard and blinking rapidly, but the truth of what his mother was saying shattered the fragile wall he had built. Tears streamed down his cheeks, silent but relentless. Lily clung to Anna, shaking, unable to contain her cries. Anna whispered soothing words, though her voice wavered with each breath. A week passed like a fading echo. Each day felt slower, softer, until finally the moment came. The room was dim when Anna's breathing grew faint, her chest rising with effort. Ethan and Lily lay on either side of her, holding her hands tightly. Bradley stood a few steps away, respectfully silent, his head slightly bowed. He had seen many final moments in his career, but none had struck him as deeply as watching a mother say goodbye to her children. Anna exhaled one last slow, gentle breath. Her fingers relaxed. The small beeping monitor beside her faded into a long, continuous tone. Ethan's face crumpled instantly, his shoulders shaking as he tried to hold back the sound of heartbreak. Lily let out a cry that pierced the stillness, her arms wrapping desperately around her mother's still body. Bradley stepped forward slowly, his voice low and soft. "I'm here," he said, kneeling beside them. "You're not alone. I promise I will take care of everything." The room grew silent once more, except for the quiet sobs of two children who had just lost the most important person in their world, unaware that soon they would step into a new chapter written by the love of a grandfather they had never met. 3 days after Anna's passing, winter settled deeper over Wyoming, covering the landscape in soft layers of early snow. The air was cold enough to sting the skin, and the quiet roads leading out of Riverton seemed almost untouched as the car made its way through the countryside. In the back seat, Ethan and Lily sat close together, bundled in worn jackets, their faces still marked with the raw grief of losing their mother. Their eyes held a quiet emptiness that only children who had lost too much, too soon, could understand. Mr. Bradley drove with steady hands, his tall, lean frame rigid with concentration. He wore a simple charcoal coat over his usual formal attire, and the faint lines around his eyes deepened each time he glanced at the rearview mirror to check on the children. The road ahead was long, but he approached it with the same commitment he brought to every responsibility, especially now, when 2 young lives depended on him to guide them safely. The windshield wipers brushed away light snowflakes as he traveled toward the Cooper family farm, the place George had dedicated his entire life to preserving. Before leaving Riverton, Bradley had visited George's farmhouse to confirm the news he dreaded. The old man had passed away quietly in his sleep. The caretaker who occasionally checked on George was a middle-aged neighbor named Mrs. Dalton, a plump woman in her early 60s with round cheeks, graying curls pinned messily on her head, and warm brown eyes that always seemed slightly watery with emotion. She had found George that morning, her usually cheerful voice trembling as she explained what happened. Mrs. Dalton had been a friend to the Cooper family for years, helping George with groceries and sometimes cooking meals for him. Her nature was nurturing and sentimental, shaped by her own experience of losing her husband young, which made her especially empathetic toward anyone facing loneliness. Now, as Bradley turned onto the snow-covered driveway of the Cooper farm, the old wooden fences came into view. The farmhouse sat proudly at the top of a slight hill, its weathered logs darkened by decades of wind and sun. Smoke drifted gently from the chimney, a reminder of the caretaker who had arrived earlier to light a fire and prepare the home for the children. The pickup truck parked beside the barn belonged to Mrs. Dalton, who was already inside making sure the house felt warm rather than abandoned. Bradley parked the car and stepped out first, opening the back door for Ethan and Lily. Ethan slid out quietly, gripping Lily's hand as he always did, his thin frame tense with uncertainty. Lily followed him, her blonde hair falling over her face as she looked around, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. They entered the farmhouse together. Warm air filled the entryway, carrying the scent of burning wood and something faintly sweet. Mrs. Dalton had baked a small tray of cookies to greet them. Inside, the farmhouse radiated warmth and history. Thick wooden beams lined the ceiling, and the living room walls were decorated with framed photographs that captured generations of Cooper family life. Old tractors, birthdays, harvest seasons, and a young George smiling proudly beside a horse. Each picture was a piece of a story the children had never known. As they moved toward the staircase, Lily tugged gently on Ethan's sleeve and pointed. Along the wall, arranged carefully and lovingly, were photographs of George at different stages of his life. One showed him as a strong young man with dark hair, holding a newborn calf. Another showed him standing proudly in front of the farmhouse during a summer harvest. Each picture was placed intentionally, forming a timeline of the Cooper legacy. Even though Ethan and Lily had never met him, the images made him feel suddenly real. At the dining table rested a single envelope beside a small oil lamp. Bradley picked it up and read the front silently before handing it to Ethan. The envelope had their names written in a shaky but deliberate hand. For Ethan and Lily. Ethan opened it slowly. Inside was a letter written by their grandfather in his last days. "My dear grandchildren," it began, "I never had the honor of seeing your faces, but I have loved you with everything I had left. This farm, this home, this land, it belongs to you now. I hope it becomes a place where you feel safe, where you grow, where you dream. You will never be alone here." As Ethan read aloud, his voice quivered, and Lily leaned her head against his shoulder, silently absorbing the words. Bradley stood nearby, his posture gentle, his eyes softened by the powerful moment. Mrs. Dalton wiped her cheeks discreetly with the edge of her sweater. When the letter was finished, silence filled the room, soft, heavy, but not lonely. Bradley knelt beside the children. "This is your home now," he said softly. "Your grandfather wanted you to have a future filled with hope, and I'll be here to make sure you get settled." Later, Ethan took Lily's hand and stepped outside onto the porch. The air was crisp, snowflakes drifting gently from the gray sky. The land stretched endlessly before them, fields wrapped in white, barns standing proudly against the horizon, and forests whispering quietly to the wind. It was vast, cold, and unfamiliar, yet something about it felt steady, like a promise they could grow into. Ethan squeezed Lily's hand and took a cautious step forward. She followed him, her small boots crunching in the snow. Together, they stood facing the sweeping land that would become their new home. The first flakes of early winter fell around them, soft and peaceful, marking the beginning of a future neither of them had imagined, but one filled with possibility. Sometimes, life brings us to the edge of heartbreak, only to show us that love never truly disappears. It simply changes form. Anna's love became her children's strength. George's love became their future. And the home they found was not just a farmhouse, but a reminder that miracles often come quietly through the people God places along our path. When we walk through darkness, we may feel abandoned, but stories like this remind us that God can turn even the deepest sorrow into a doorway toward hope. He works in ways we may not always see, through a grandfather's letter, a stranger's kindness, a warm home waiting in the snow, or the strength of a child holding a sibling's hand. If you're watching this today, may you be reminded that no matter how heavy life feels, God still has a plan for you. His miracles might be slow, gentle, and hidden, but they are real. And just like Ethan and Lily, you are never truly alone. May God bless you, protect your family, and fill your days with quiet miracles you never expected. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone who might need hope today. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Your words help us bring more healing stories to the world. And if you haven't yet, hit the subscribe button so you won't miss the next story of faith, love, and the quiet miracles God places in our lives. May God watch over every one of you watching right now. God bless you and your loved ones.